EU leaders have held crisis talks in Brussels in the wake of Washington's pivot away from its transatlantic partners. The extraordinary European summit came almost a week after a heated exchange between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House exposed the growing rift between the U.S. and its allies for all the world to see.
This public display of support for Ukraine's war-weary president was the first thing EU leaders wanted to achieve with this emergency meeting, which comes a week after Volodymyr Zelenskyy was kicked out of the White House after clashing with Donald Trump.
Dear Volodymyr, we are with you since day one. We'll continue with you now, and we will continue in the future.
I want to thank all our European leaders, first of all, and for such signal, strong support, strong support from the very beginning of the war, and what's been during all this period and last week. You stay with us.
Zelenskyy used the occasion to ask EU leaders to continue urging Washington to involve Kyiv in peace negotiations with Moscow. EU leaders agree with Zelenskyy that an agreement to stop the fighting without security guarantees for Ukraine wouldn't deter Russia from attacking again. The summit statement EU leaders have endorsed says a ceasefire must be part of a process that leads to a full peace agreement. It adds that any agreement must be accompanied by, quote, robust and credible security guarantees for Ukraine. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban didn't back the statement, but all the leaders have committed to working together to bolster Europe's defence. They discussed easing the bloc's strict budget debt rules so member states can increase their military spending.
Today, history is being written. We are coming out of this European Council very determined to ensure Europe's security and to act with the scale, the speed and the resolve that this situation demands. I presented the reArm Europe plan today to the leaders. A plan to give Europe the military capability that it needs to face today's threats. It could mobilise up to 800 billion euros, and it is about taking more responsibility on our shoulders for our own security.
This is a moment of vindication for France's President Emmanuel Macron, who for years has been urging Europe to build the capacity to defend itself without relying on NATO and the United States. France is now considering protecting European allies with its nuclear arsenal.
I proposed to open a strategic conversation with the member states that are interested in making progress on this subject.
It's an option that would have been unthinkable under the decades of transatlantic cooperation.
For more, let's bring in Sir Richard Shirreff, former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander for Europe at NATO. He's also the co-founder of the risk management company Stratego Worldwide. Sir, welcome to DW. We heard it there. The EU has agreed on allocations of 800 billion for rearmament in the long run. But Ukraine really seems like it needs help now. Is the EU truthfully doing all it can?
I think yesterday's events were really, really important. Let's be clear about that. And that 800 billion euro fund that was announced is nothing short of good news. But you're absolutely right. Ukraine needs help now. The Americans have made it clear that they're going to cut immediate support, cut intelligence support. And so this is what I call a come as you are party for Europe and Canada. European nations and Canada have just now got to ramp up immediately to fill the gap. And this means taking risk. It means giving immediate money, I think, to the Ukrainians who can spend the money very, very quickly without the procurement challenges that many European countries, but also for European countries to dig deep in their own arsenals to provide Ukraine the means to hold Russia, because the American withdrawal is going to hit them hard.
EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Europe faces a clear and present danger, but that danger is actually not new, is it? It's been 3 years since Putin launched his attack on Ukraine, and the Europeans are still scrambling for a joint strategy. Is this not too little, too late?
Well, I've been arguing that this is 11 years too late. The attack on Ukraine was launched in February 2014. This is when the war started. Yes, of course, the full-scale invasion in February 2022 was the next major phase. And you're absolutely right. Europe and Canada and NATO as a whole should have stepped up to the mark 3 years ago at the very latest. But having said all that, it's better late than never is the message, and this is welcome news.
Better late than never, but I want to look at the reason why this didn't happen earlier. Was it naive for European nations to rely on the U.S. for their security and the security of their neighbors for as long as they did?
Yes, in a word. And Europe for 70 years has been sitting back and allowing America to provide European security, and European countries have frankly been freeloading off American support. So in a sense, Europe, we need to look at ourselves in Europe for some of the reasons for America's withdrawal from the scene. And this has been naive. Yes, of course it has. But of course now, and the reason this didn't happen 3 years ago is also because of a sort of ostrich-like head in the sand about the real threat faced by Putin to European security as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So now it does seem clear that Europe is going to have to own this conflict. What chance does Ukraine stand, given the dramatic shift in circumstances?
Well, let's be optimistic about this. Europe has more than the capability. The European combined GDP dwarfs that of Russia, and with political will, with political courage, and by making sacrifices, Europe can absolutely help support Ukraine in not only holding Russia, but holding on long enough, I think, to then build up the capabilities to push Russia, if not out of Ukraine, but at least to make Russia realize that they will never achieve their aims in Ukraine. Because let's be clear, Putin has never stepped back from his intent to remove Ukraine from the map as a sovereign state. And that threat has existential consequences for Europe as a whole, and we in Europe have got to be prepared to do what needs to be done to support Ukraine.
These U.S. aid cuts will leave Ukraine especially exposed in terms of air defense. You've been calling for a European-led Ukraine air protection plan. What could that look like?
Well, I think the European Skyshield initiative, or the Skyshield initiative, is a very, very interesting proposal. I think it deserves wide support. It involves Western aircraft providing support for Ukraine in Ukrainian airspace, shooting down drones and cruise missiles in designated areas. And I think it absolutely will send not only a powerful signal to Russia, that European is properly supporting Ukraine, but it also sends a really powerful signal to President Trump. In other words, you may want to do a deal with Putin over the heads of the Ukrainians, but we Europeans are stepping up to the mark, and we are genuinely going to help Ukraine properly.
Yeah. Now that you mention U.S. President Donald Trump, just yesterday he said again that if his NATO partners don't pay, he wouldn't come to their defense. Do you think the U.S. under Trump would uphold Article 5?
No. I think the message came clear, and this has been on the cards now ever since the Munich Security Conference, when Hegseth said that the U.S. would never be a guarantee for European security. America voting alongside Russia and North Korea against a European motion condemning nuclear Russia aggression. No, I think we have to assume, and I say this with real sadness in my heart, because I've served alongside Americans and have the greatest admiration for the American military. But I have to say now that we cannot rely on America as an ally.
And considering the appeased approach of the U.S. to Russian aggression, what do you think right now is stopping Vladimir Putin from expanding the war into Georgia, Moldova, or the Baltics?
He doesn't have the capability right now. If you look at what the Russians are stretched. They have been, yes, they're making the progress they've been making. It has been absolutely glacial at the cost of vast numbers of Russian soldiers. By the 9th of May, when Putin stands up in his moment of vainglory to mark Victory Day, the Victory Day parade in Moscow, Russia will have lost 1 million soldiers killed and wounded. They're really finding it difficult to move any further. And Ukraine is holding, and Ukraine's had recent military success. Ukraine still holds part of Russia in Kursk province. So he's fixed effectively in Ukraine. Now, if he is given a peace deal by Trump that gives Putin what he wants, make no mistake, he will declare victory and he will use the time to build up, retrain, and when he's ready, he will have another go at finishing the job in Ukraine. And he will move on to finish the job in Moldova, Georgia, and indeed Romania, where, of course, we've already seen electoral manipulation by Russia.
That's Sir Richard Shirreff of Strategia Worldwide. Pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for all those insights.
Thank you so much.
For more on this extraordinary summit, we're joined now by DW correspondent Lucia Schulten, who's followed it all from Brussels. Lucia, EU leaders jumping into action there. Where is that 800 billion euros to rearm Europe going to come from, though, and how fast can it be mobilized?
Yeah, so let me talk you through the two biggest chunks. So the first big chunk are 650 billion euros, and these are basically debts that the member states should be allowed to make. So the European Union wants to change its rules, which are relatively strict right now when it comes to making new debts for the states, and they want to change it in a way that it will be allowed to make debts for defense spending. That is the first chunk. And the second one would be 150 billion euros of loans, where the European Union goes ahead, takes out these loans and gives them to the member states. And the reason for doing that is that the European Union does get a pretty good credit rate that maybe not every member state would get. And this is the other big part from which the member states should be allowed to do joint procurement for arms, missiles, other defense goods. So this is the plan, but this is a more long-term plan. So this is for the years to come to allow Europe to rearm itself. So the next step would be that the European Commission will have to really put proposals, legislative proposals on the table. It did say it will do this in the next 2 weeks when the leaders will meet for the next time. So there is a real sense of urgency here in the European Union. But as I have said, these are plans for the longer term to rearm, as they say here, Europe.
The French President Emmanuel Macron, we heard him there in the report. He said he would like to open a debate on extending his country's nuclear deterrent to his European allies. How do these allies feel about it?
Yes, so there has been some welcoming words for this proposal. For example, they have been coming from the Lithuanian president or also from the Luxembourgish president, but there are also other states which have been a bit more skeptical, and this has been mainly outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who has said he thinks that Europe or Germany should stick to the current plan, which is backed by NATO, and which is mainly that Europe or NATO relies on mainly US nuclear weapons, which are on the territory. And he's been saying that this is that a lot of parties in Germany would also be thinking the same. So he's very skeptical. Nevertheless, Emmanuel Macron has been saying that other leaders have approached him and that he is now looking into this, that there will be technical talks coming, and that then in the first half of this year there should be a decision what is possible and what not. But these are still very early days in this debate.
Yeah, and it bears repeating that Olaf Scholz is, of course, on his way out of the Chancellery here in Germany. Now, this was about showing unity as well publicly towards the U.S., but unity when it comes to Ukraine usually means the unity of 26 and Hungary refusing to go along with the bloc, doesn't it? So how are the remaining members managing to work around Viktor Orban here?
Yeah, they have a certain practice in working around Viktor Orban, you can say, here in the European Union. This is not new that Viktor Orban blocks military aid for Ukraine. Yesterday, they have solved it by issuing two statements. One was backed by all 27, the first part on the EU defense. The second one was backed only by 26 states. The second one was the one on the help for Ukraine, where the other 26 EU states have reiterated certain things like there should be no negotiations for Ukraine without Ukraine, but they have also made clear that they want to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position so that it could go in this strong position into possible peace talks. And they have reaffirmed that they would keep supporting Ukraine with military aid. As I've mentioned, there has been some creativity before in circumventing Hungarian vetoes. This worked in certain areas, but then there are also areas, for example, when it comes to military aid from something called the European Peace Facility. There, Hungary is still blocking money for Ukraine, and there it has to be seen if this will ever be freed up.
There's Lucia Schulten in Brussels. Thanks. Now, after attending this summit, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is set to travel to Saudi Arabia next week to hold talks with the U.S. on ending the war with Russia. He's expected to meet President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff says a letter from Zelenskyy to Trump contained an apology after their row last week in the White House. Trump has been pressuring Zelenskyy to make a peace deal, pausing U.S. military aid and suspending intelligence sharing. Let's talk to DW correspondent Max Zander for the perspective from Ukraine. He joins us from Kyiv. Max, Zelenskyy is set to meet with U.S. officials next week in Saudi Arabia. Could this be a sign that the two countries are moving closer again?
Well, yes, Nicole. I mean, at least that's a reason. There's a reason to hope for the Ukrainians. They do need the U.S. They do need the U.S. weapons and the U.S. capabilities to fight this war. European partners, other countries don't have the same capabilities to fill their shoes, at least for the moment. Now, the situation did look very bleak after that press conference last week when Zelensky's team got kicked out of the White House, quite literally. What happened in the following days is that military aid was suspended, intelligence sharing was suspended. But from what we're hearing, Zelensky's team and Trump's team over the course of the last week have been in touch and have been trying to fix this relationship, trying to find a common way forward. Perhaps what also influenced Trump's decision to get back to the table with Zelenskyy is that the Europeans have vowed to significantly step up their efforts for Ukraine to take more responsibility. That is something that he also has communicated to his supporters back home in the U.S., that the U.S. should not be the solely, as he likes to frame it, responsible to finance the war and finance Ukraine's defense. So, the Ukrainians certainly are looking forward to meeting with the Americans and getting this mineral deal done. We'll have to wait for the fine print to look at the details, what exactly this is going to entail. But perhaps this could also mean that U.S. weapons and U.S. intelligence are back on the table.
Mm-hmm. For now, aid from Washington remains cut, though. Is Ukraine's military already feeling the lack of U.S. support on the front lines?
This is something that usually comes with a little bit of lead time. When you talk about intelligence and the U.S. intelligence capabilities, that is likely something that would be seen quite fast, quite rapidly, so to say. The Ukrainians need American capabilities to make out targets within Russian-occupied territory and within Russia, for example, to take out Russian air defense systems, to take out Russian command posts, to take out munitions depots. This has been a quite successful strategy in the past to attack in the rear, and for that they need American intelligence. We don't know exactly, and from what we heard, the Ukrainians, at least yesterday, communicated that they also didn't know exactly what the suspension of intelligence sharing would entail. But we could imagine that it will make an immediate effect on the battlefield. Other countries, like France, for example, have promised to share more of their intelligence to try to make up for it, but they don't have the exact same capabilities. If you look at the military support, that is something that's going to be seen not so soon likely, because the Ukrainians are sitting on stockpiles, for example, for 155mm artillery shells. A lot of the stuff that comes in from the border doesn't go from the border directly to the front line, but sits in a warehouse, is modified, is retrofitted, or comes to use later in the war. But certainly in a few weeks, in a few months, shouldn't there be any replacement, the Ukrainians are going to see the difference when it comes to the use of weapons, and they're also already probably going to start altering their strategy, not knowing how much how much additional reinforcements or replacements are going to come.
Mm-hmm. Ukraine says its energy infrastructure came under massive Russian attack again this Friday. How are these latest attacks affecting the country?
Right, so there was a large-scale attack that's happened yesterday in Ukraine, and from what we're hearing, the targets were Ukrainian gas infrastructure. This is nothing new. Energy infrastructure has been attacked, especially in the winter months since winter 22-23. And this follows a series of attacks over the last couple of weeks, which happened predominantly in the Odessa Oblast. So what the Russians are trying to do is they're trying to hit the gas production units here in Ukraine, which, increases the prices, but also takes away what is available, limits the gas production. So the Ukrainians are already looking into importing more gas, and this is a very difficult situation, not just for the industry, but also especially for civilians. This is a sunny day here in Kyiv now, but we're still somewhat at the end of winter. It was a very cold February, so it was a very difficult situation there.
Max Senna in Kyiv, thanks so much for your reporting.